Why didn't you aim for the head? The question struck like a hammer in the middle of the war room, sharp and merciless, bleeding through the electric silence that followed the gunshot. The weapon had been fired. The bullet had missed by inches. President Ibrahim Traoré'S stood there, heart pounding not from fear, but from something deeper. His eyes, dark and searching, locked onto the figure bound to the table leg. The man before him wasn't a stranger. He was someone who had once slept beside him on desert floors, bled in the same battles and carried wounded civilians on his back. A brother in arms, someone he had once called family. Now that same man had tried to end his life. Thunder rumbled above Ouagadougou. Rain smacked hard against the palace windows as if the sky itself had been caught in the shock. The room smelled of gunpowder, adrenaline, and betrayal. "I remember the day you saved my life," the old friend rasped, coughing blood. "And that's the only reason I missed." Traoré said nothing. He approached slowly, boots clicking against the cold marble. The silence in the room was suffocating. His advisors stood paralyzed. No one dared speak. No one moved. He crouched beside his would-be assassin, studying him not with rage, but with something infinitely more painful: disbelief. "I would have taken the bullet," Traoré murmured, "but not from you." 4 hours earlier, he had been comforting a sick child in the city hospital, promising her a future free from the thunder of drones. And now, in the same uniform that held her tiny hand, he bore a fresh wound, just above his heart. His old friend had entered the palace under full clearance. Security hadn't blinked. They had laughed, hugged, even shared a drink, like brothers reuniting after years of silence. And then came the silence between gunmetal and breath. Traoré hadn't flinched when the pistol rose. He had looked his friend in the eyes and waited to see if the soul behind them was still alive. It almost wasn't. Now, as medics worked quickly to wrap the shoulder wound, Traoré ordered the entire room cleared. The guards hesitated. The ministers protested, but his voice, calm and low, left no room for questions. Only he and the traitor remained. "You sold me for what?" Traoré asked softly, pouring water into 2 tin cups. "Power? Money? Threats?" A pause, then a whisper. "They said they'd cure my sister. They said I'd never have to choose between loyalty and blood again." Traoré's jaw clenched, but he didn't explode. He had known the reach of foreign powers was vast, but to exploit a family illness, to twist love into a weapon? "They?" he asked. The man looked away. "They don't have names, just instructions?" Outside, sirens wailed far off in the rain. The city slept, but its leader now knew that the war had crept inside his walls, wearing the face of those he trusted most. What he did next was something no one could have predicted. He unlocked the handcuffs himself. The old friend stared in disbelief. "You're letting me go?" "No," Traoré said. "I'm letting you live. So you remember what you almost destroyed?" He handed over a small key, silver, unmarked. "It's to a safe house in the West. 3 days. If you come back, you'll work for me again, but in the shadows. If you don't, I'll bury what's left of our past." There was no threat in his voice, only truth. As the man limped toward the door, soaked in guilt more than rain, Traoré stood watching. The guards looked on in stunned silence, unsure whether to salute or raise their rifles. The president raised a hand. "Stand down." Minutes later, Ibrahim Traoré returned to the leather chair that bore the bullet hole, just above the chest. Blood still stained the armrest. He sat quietly, running his fingers over the torn leather. "I don't need men who never fall," he whispered. "I need men who remember what it means to fall and choose to rise again." Somewhere beyond the palace gates, foreign agents watched and waited. They had failed to break him, and now they didn't understand him. "What kind of man forgives like that?" one of them asked in a secure room in another continent. The storm hadn't passed. It had simply moved, like a predator searching for another weak flank. 3 days had passed since the assassination attempt inside the palace. The day Ibrahim Traoré faced the gun held by a man he once called brother. But the wound wasn't the one on his shoulder. It was deeper, something no medic could stitch closed. And then, on the 3rd morning, the letter arrived. It wasn't delivered through any official channel. No courier, no diplomatic seal. Just an envelope, slipped under his private chamber door in the dead of night, smelling faintly of sweat, metal, and red dust. Only one person knew how to bypass that much security. Only one man would have the audacity to leave him something so personal, so untraceable, yet so deliberately placed. Traoré stared at the envelope for minutes before touching it. His hand hovered like it might burn him. The writing on the front wasn't a name. It was a single word: brother. He opened it slowly. I should have died a soldier, not a pawn. You taught me loyalty, but they taught me fear. I chose wrong. I know I did. I saw it in your eyes, but they're planning more. I was never the only one. I was just the beginning. Some of them, they wear our uniform. They smile like we smile. But they speak in coded whispers, and they meet where no satellites can see. There's a woman. She's the contact. French accented, but not French. Always wears white gloves. Always leaves first. You'll find her in Kaya. But they'll find her first if you don't move. If I don't return, it's because I didn't deserve to. But if you still believe in redemption, burn this letter and trust no one who shakes with their right hand. Your brother who failed you. Traoré sat still, the paper trembling slightly between his fingers. Outside, the sun was rising, gold bleeding through the cracked clouds like the aftermath of war. A new day, but no peace. He burned the letter without a word. Then he turned to his most trusted aide, Captain Nabire, a woman who had once lost her entire unit to a drone strike and still refused to leave the battlefield. Kaya, Traoré said quietly. Today. Alone, sir? She asked, instantly sensing the weight in his tone. He looked at her. Number with someone who's never tried to kill me yet. The roads to Kaya were never safe, but that wasn't why Traoré chose to drive himself. He needed silence, control. He needed the feel of rubber meeting sand, of dust breaking open against the windshield. This was his country, his war, his call. The road hummed under the tires as the armored vehicle moved like a whisper through the outer regions, past small villages where children waved without knowing who sat behind the bulletproof glass. He watched them, bare feet, empty buckets, faces still full of hope, still unbroken. And that's when he saw it, a child digging in a trash mound with her bare hands, pulling out a piece of rotting bread and hiding it behind her shirt before darting into a narrow alley. He slammed the brakes. Nabire, riding shotgun, tensed. Sir? He was already out the door. Within minutes, he had tracked the child to a crumbling shack made of scrap tin and torn cloth. No parents, no roof. Just her and a younger brother, thinner than the stick he held. Traoré removed his jacket slowly and crouched down beside them. What's your name? He asked softly and more. The girl didn't answer, but the boy stared into his face and whispered, We know you. His heart cracked. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver coin. Not just money, but one of the ceremonial coins given only to fallen hero families. He placed it in the girl's hand. This, he said, is not charity. It's a promise. You're not forgotten. Back in the car, Nabire waited in silence. When he returned, she said nothing. They drove on deeper into Kaya. The rendezvous point was a butcher's shop, abandoned for years. No meat, just bloodstains and rust. Fitting. The woman in white gloves was already there. She didn't flinch when Traoré entered. You're early, she said. You're surrounded, he replied. No, I'm prepared. She didn't blink. Traoré noticed everything. No weapons, no bag, but a faint scar along her left jaw, surgical and recent. I was told you were the one feeding them, he said. Planning strikes, recruiting inside our camps. I'm not feeding them, she replied. I created them. Silence fell like a knife. I gave them their orders, but not because I wanted your death, she said, stepping closer. Because I wanted to see if you were real. You tested me with a bullet? He asked. She nodded. And you passed. In that moment, the truth dropped like a body. This wasn't just treason. This was a test. A foreign entity probing him, not to kill him, but to measure him. His rage, his restraint, his soul. You're not here on your own, he said. No, she whispered. I'm just the message." And with that, she walked away into the darkness of the alley, vanishing like smoke. Traoré stood still. Behind him, Nabaré's voice cut through the silence. "What now?" He turned slowly, the weight of a continent behind his eyes. "Now," he said, "we prepare for the war they haven't even declared yet." The war wasn't coming. It had already begun. The interrogation room was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't just wait, but watches. A single chair sat under the flickering overhead bulb, rust clinging to its legs like dried blood. A fan whirred somewhere in the distance, spinning slow, almost lazy, mocking the tension in the air. Across from Ibrahim Traoré sat a man who had once been awarded the country's highest honor for battlefield valor. Now he refused to speak. They had found him in Kaya, hiding in a church, dressed as a priest, whispering prayers in a dialect no longer spoken by any living tribe. At first they thought he was mad, but when they found the microchip embedded in the lining of his robe, alongside satellite maps and encrypted coordinates, they understood. He wasn't mad. He was the courier. Traoré leaned forward, elbows on the table. No guards, no aides. Just him and the man with cracked lips and empty eyes. "You once saved my life," Traoré said, voice low. "Do you remember that?" The man blinked once. "That day outside Jibo. You carried me through gunfire with a bullet in your leg. You didn't flinch. Didn't speak then either. But you moved. You acted." Still nothing. Traoré stood and walked slowly behind the man, his boots echoing across concrete. "Now you're mute, silent, obedient to people who will bury you in a shallow grave once you're done." The man's shoulders twitched, barely, and then Traoré did something no one expected. He walked to the door, opened it, and left. Not a word, not a threat, just silence, returned with silence. Back in the palace, reports were piling like fallen bodies. Satellite photos, weapons caches hidden beneath orphanages, messages traced to offshore accounts. A pattern was forming, not of chaos but coordination. This wasn't a rebellion, it was a chessboard, and someone was playing both sides. Captain Nabaré entered his office without knocking, holding a thin folder. "We got this from the chip," she said. Encrypted data logs, mostly in code, but one file was titled in clear French. "What did it say?" he asked, barely glancing up. She dropped the folder on his desk. Her voice was heavy with disbelief. "Operation Détourner les Héros." Operation Detour the Hero. He froze. "They think I'm a detour?" he muttered. "No," she replied. "They think you're too focused." He opened the folder, inside a series of directives, each one targeting his childhood contacts, his old unit, even former lovers, anyone who had ever meant anything to him. One by one, they were being compromised or watched. It wasn't about destabilizing a nation. It was about isolating him. At dusk, Traoré stood alone on the palace balcony. The sky bled orange and crimson like open wounds above Ouagadougou. The wind carried voices from the street, children playing, old men debating over tin radios, the heartbeat of a country still believing in something.